gurney was a bullet on wheels, and Bumpy Johnson was the ammunition. Someone had sabotaged the wheel locks and disabled every safety system in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. He lay paralyzed by drugs but fully aware, strapped down and helpless as he rocketed down the corridor at increasing speed. Doctors and nurses leaped aside. The hallway stretched ahead like a launch ramp. And at the end, 12 stories above Manhattan, plate glass windows promised to turn his medical emergency into street pizza in exactly 45 seconds. March 18, 1954. 8:30 a.m. Bumpy Johnson walked through the marble lobby of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital for what he believed was routine surgery to remove an appendix that had been causing him sharp, persistent pain for weeks. The hospital's reputation was impeccable. It served Manhattan's elite, treating everyone from Wall Street executives to Broadway performers. His personal physician, Dr. Marcus Williams, had specifically recommended this facility and this surgical team. The procedure was supposed to be straightforward, low risk, performed by board-certified surgeons who'd handled thousands of similar operations. Everything seemed legitimate until Bumpy noticed something wrong with the anesthesia mask. The surgery was scheduled for 9 a.m. At 8:45, Bumpy was wheeled into the operating room on a standard hospital gurney, the kind used to transport patients throughout the hospital. Nothing unusual about the equipment, nothing suspicious about the procedure. But Dr. Williams wasn't there. Instead, a surgeon Bumpy didn't recognize introduced himself as Dr. Morrison, explaining that Dr. Williams had been called away for an emergency. The replacement was professional, reassuring, and completely convincing as he prepared the anesthesia. "Count backward from 10, Dr. Morrison instructed, placing the mask over Bumpy's nose and mouth. Bumpy got to 7 before the world went dark, but he didn't stay unconscious. The anesthesia was designed to paralyze his muscles while keeping his mind alert. Within minutes, Bumpy was fully aware of what was happening around him but unable to move, speak, or signal for help. That's when he realized this wasn't surgery. It was execution. Dr. Morrison wasn't removing his appendix. He was preparing Bumpy for what would look like the most bizarre medical accident in hospital history. The surgery was a cover story to explain why Bumpy was in the hospital, sedated and strapped to a gurney. The real plan was much more creative. Someone had spent days modifying the gurney's wheel mechanisms with precision engineering. The standard safety locks that prevented gurneys from rolling uncontrolled had been professionally disabled using surgical instruments. The wheels had been replaced with high-speed ball-bearing assemblies typically used in racing wheelchairs or industrial equipment. The rubber grip strips that normally provided friction control were completely removed. Most importantly, the brake system, including emergency stops, wheel locks, and the manual brake lever, had been entirely dismantled and discarded. The gurney was now essentially a guided missile on wheels. The hospital's 12th floor was perfect for the assassination. It was a long, straight corridor with a gentle downward slope toward the windows at the far end. The hallway was 200 feet long, providing plenty of distance for a gurney to build deadly speed. And at the end of the corridor, floor-to-ceiling plate glass windows offered a 120-foot drop to the concrete street below. The plan was elegant and untraceable. Bumpy would accidentally roll down the corridor during transport between surgical suites. The paralysis drugs would prevent him from stopping himself. Hospital staff would be unable to catch a runaway gurney traveling at highway speeds. The windows would shatter on impact, sending Bumpy plummeting to his death in what would appear to be a tragic combination of equipment failure and medical mishap. No evidence of murder, no indication of conspiracy, just a terrible accident that killed a patient during routine medical care. Dr. Morrison finished his preparations and began wheeling Bumpy toward the corridor. "Time for your trip," he said quietly, knowing Bumpy could hear but couldn't respond. They stopped at the top of the hallway. Dr. Morrison positioned the gurney carefully, aiming it directly at the windows 200 feet away. Then he released the gurney and gave it a firm push. Bumpy began rolling down the corridor at walking speed, but the modified wheels and the hallway's slope quickly accelerated his movement. 5 mfar, 10 mfar, 15 mfar. The first nurse to notice the runaway gurney thought it was simply a case of poor wheel locks. She called out and began jogging alongside, trying to grab the gurney's rails to stop it. But at 20 mph, the gurney was moving faster than anyone could run. The nurse couldn't keep up, and grabbing the rails at that speed would have broken her arms. 25 mph. 30 mph. Now the entire hospital staff realized something was wrong. Doctors and nurses lined the corridor, watching helplessly as Bumpy rocketed toward the windows. Some tried to position themselves to stop the gurney, but at highway speeds, the impact would have killed anyone who tried. 35 mph, 40 mph. Bumpy was fully conscious throughout the acceleration. He could see the ceiling tiles blurring past like highway markers. He could hear medical staff shouting instructions and calling for emergency procedures. He could feel every bump and vibration as the gurney reached speeds that hospital equipment was never designed to handle. Most terrifying of all, he could see the windows getting bigger and bigger as he approached his death. The plate glass windows at the end of the corridor were 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall, extending from floor to ceiling. They were designed to provide natural light to the hospital corridor, not to stop runaway gurneys traveling at 45 mph. At this speed, Bumpy would shatter the glass, sail through the opening, and fall 120 feet to the concrete below. The impact would kill him instantly, and the scene would look like a bizarre medical accident rather than premeditated murder. But the killers had made one crucial mistake in their planning. They'd assumed the hospital staff would be too shocked to react effectively. They'd assumed no one would be able to stop a gurney moving at highway speeds. They hadn't counted on Dr. Sarah Chen. Dr. Chen was a trauma surgeon who'd served 2 tours in Korea, treating wounded soldiers in mobile army surgical hospitals where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. She'd performed battlefield amputations, emergency thoracic surgery, and triage procedures under enemy fire. She'd seen enough medical emergencies to know that textbook solutions don't work in crisis situations. Sometimes survival requires breaking every rule, improvising with whatever equipment is available, and accepting that the cure might look more dangerous than the disease. At the 100-foot mark, when Bumpy was traveling at 35 mph and accelerating, Dr. Chen made a decision that saved his life. She commandeered a hospital cleaning cart. The janitor's cart was a heavy, industrial-grade unit loaded with cleaning supplies, industrial disinfectants, multiple mop buckets, and a commercial floor buffer. The cart itself weighed approximately 200 pounds when fully loaded. More importantly, it was built on a wide wheelbase with rubber casters designed for stability, making it the perfect intercepting barrier. Dr. Chen calculated the angle, speed, and impact trajectory in the few seconds she had available, positioning the cart to redirect rather than stop the runaway gurney. Dr. Chen positioned herself in the cart at the 150-foot mark, directly in Bumpy's path. Instead of trying to stop the gurney, she planned to redirect it. At the last possible moment, as Bumpy approached at 40 mph, Dr. Chen pushed the heavy cart into his path at a precise angle. The gurney struck the cart's metal frame, which absorbed some of the impact while deflecting Bumpy's trajectory to the right. Instead of heading straight toward the windows, the gurney careened toward the wall at a 45-degree angle. The collision with the wall was violent. The gurney crumpled on impact, and Bumpy was thrown from the medical table onto the hospital floor. But he was alive, conscious, and 50 feet away from the windows that would have killed him. The paralysis drugs were wearing off. Bumpy could move his fingers, then his hands, then his arms. Within minutes, he was sitting up, bruised and shaken, but very much alive. Dr. Morrison was nowhere to be found. He'd disappeared from the hospital immediately after releasing the gurney, leaving no trace of his identity or credentials. The hospital's employment records showed no Dr. Morrison had ever worked there. The surgical suite showed no evidence that any procedure had been planned or performed. The investigation revealed the extent of the sabotage. The gurney's wheels had indeed been modified with racing-grade bearings. The safety locks had been professionally disabled. The brake system had been completely removed. Someone with mechanical expertise and hospital access had spent considerable time preparing the assassination. But the investigation also revealed something the killers hadn't expected. Hospital security cameras had recorded the entire incident from multiple angles. The footage clearly showed Dr. Morrison's face, his deliberate positioning of the gurney, and his intentional release that sent Bumpy toward the windows. Federal agents identified Dr. Morrison as Marcus Webb, a contract killer who specialized in making murders look like accidents. Webb had been hired by a consortium of legitimate businessmen who were being pressured by Bumpy to pay fair wages to their Harlem employees. Rather than negotiate with Bumpy or accept his demands for worker protections, they decided to eliminate him in a way that would discourage other civil rights advocates from making similar demands. Webb was arrested 2 days later at LaGuardia Airport, attempting to board a flight to Buenos Aires. In his luggage, investigators found detailed floor plans of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, technical specifications for hospital gurney modifications, and payment records showing $50,000 from a group calling itself the Manhattan Business Consortium. The consortium included the owners of 3 garment factories, 2 construction companies, and a trucking business, all of which employed significant numbers of Harlem residents at below minimum wages. Webb's arrest led to a federal investigation that exposed the conspiracy and resulted in criminal charges against all 7 consortium members. More importantly, it led to federal legislation requiring hospitals to install mandatory safety systems on all patient transport equipment. Dr. Sarah Chen became a legend in emergency medicine circles, not for performing complex surgery, but for using a cleaning cart to save a life. She continued working at Columbia Presbyterian for another 30 years, eventually becoming the hospital's chief of trauma surgery. The modified gurney was preserved as evidence and later donated to a medical museum as an example of how medical equipment could be weaponized. The hospital corridor was redesigned with safety barriers and emergency stops to prevent similar incidents. But the most lasting change was personal. Bumpy Johnson had always been careful about his medical care, but the hospital incident taught him that even trusted institutions could be compromised. He began traveling with his own security team to all medical appointments and insisted on verifying the credentials of every healthcare provider. The incident also demonstrated something important about assassination attempts. The more elaborate and creative the murder method, the more likely it was to fail due to unforeseen variables. A simple shooting or stabbing might have succeeded where the hospital gurney failed because it relied on fewer moving parts and fewer opportunities for intervention. The Manhattan Business Consortium learned a different lesson. They discovered that trying to eliminate someone like Bumpy Johnson often brought more attention to the problems they were trying to hide. The failed assassination attempt led to federal investigations, criminal prosecutions, and exactly the kind of worker protection legislation they'd been trying to prevent. March 18, 1954. A routine medical procedure became a high-speed assassination attempt that was stopped by quick thinking and a cleaning cart. A hospital corridor became a racetrack where the finish line meant death, and a trauma surgeon proved that sometimes the most sophisticated murder plot can be defeated by simple courage and a janitor's equipment. The gurney that was supposed to be Bumpy Johnson's hearse became evidence of his survival. The hospital that was supposed to be his tomb became the place where he learned that even medical care required vigilance. And the windows that were supposed to be his exit from life became a reminder that sometimes the distance between death and survival is exactly 50 feet, and one person willing to push a cleaning cart into the path of a runaway gurney. Columbia Presbyterian Hospital still uses gurneys to transport patients, but every piece of equipment now has mandatory safety locks, emergency brakes, and speed governors that prevent runaway incidents. It's a reminder that medical equipment should heal, not harm, and that sometimes the most dangerous place in America isn't a dark alley or a criminal hideout. Sometimes it's a hospital corridor on the 12th floor, where healing becomes killing, and a cleaning cart becomes the difference between life and death.